Leo was afraid I'd hurt his first love, so he joined forces with my parents and banished me to a remote countryside, separating us for 3 years. For 3 years, there was no word, no concern. 3 years later he finally remembered me, his ex-girlfriend, and drove out to the countryside wearing an air of magnanimity. "Pack your things, I'm taking you back." I stood before the dilapidated gate, backlit, cradling a swaddled bundle securely in my arms. The infant inside had just reached 1 month old, making soft, cooing sounds. Leo finally noticed the child in my arms, his brow knitting tightly. "Dora, whose child is this?" I met his gaze. "Mine." He looked as if he'd heard a joke, disbelief written all over his face, a sneer at the corner of his mouth. "Yours? What trick are you playing now? Picking up some random brat and trying to pin it on me?" When he called my child a brat, my brow tightened. "Leo, he's not a brat. He's my child." His expression darkened in an instant. He strode over and reached out as if to lift the swaddling. I stepped aside, his hand came away empty. Leo withdrew his hand, anger brewing in his eyes. "Dora, you'd better explain this to me." I looked up, meeting the slight distortion anger had carved in his face, and spoke with a hint of mockery. "Explain what? Explain why I have a child? Or explain why you've ignored me for the past 3 years?" Leo looked as if someone had stepped on his tail. "Turn a deaf ear? It was your own misconduct back then. Nina and your aunt and uncle only sent you here to calm you down for your own good. And now you're blaming me? Misconduct, for my own good, calm down." Such familiar words. 3 years ago, Nina cried that I had pushed her down the stairs and almost killed her. Although she later clarified that she had tripped by accident, the seed of suspicion had already been planted. At first Leo believed me and argued with Nina on my behalf. But later, the way he looked at Nina grew more complicated, and he began to say I had become sharp, childish, and unreasonable. Later, he stood with my parents and said I needed to calm down. Ignoring my pleading and explanations, they forcibly sent me to this remote mountain village. They sent me for 3 years. No phone calls, no letters, no contact at all. As if I had never existed in their lives. I held the child and said softly, "I don't blame you. I don't blame anyone. Because none of you are worth me wasting another ounce of emotion." Leo stared at the child in my arms, anger in his eyes. "You say this is your child, where's the proof?" "Dora, you lie so much, how do I know this isn't a trick to force me to take you back and play along?" I couldn't be bothered to explain. "Believe it or not, it's up to you. The child is mine, and that's enough." Leo suddenly grabbed my wrist, his eyes blazing. "Tell me. Is this some wild man from the villages? You've only been here 3 years and you can't stand being alone?" I gasped from the pain. The child in my arms seemed to feel the tension and burst into a cry. "You hurt me, Leo." I tried to shake his hand off, but it was useless. He sneered. "Hurt? Dora, when you put a green hat on me, did you ever think about whether it would hurt me?" "A green hat?" I almost laughed. "Leo, we broke up long ago. We ended it 3 years ago when you left me here without a word." Leo seemed enraged by the word ended. "I never said it was over. Who gave you permission to end it?" He wrenched his hand free from my wrist and pointed at the crying child. "Get rid of this unknown street kid. I can act like nothing ever happened and take you back." Get rid of him? My heart felt like it had been struck by a stone frozen solid, cold and painful. "Say that again?" An all-consuming fury wrapped around me. "Give him away, or send him to an orphanage." Leo's tone carried a barely noticeable irritation. "Dora, we could start over, but with him, what would that look like?" "Start over?" Looking at his self-assured face, I suddenly remembered the despair I felt when I was first brought here. In those first months I cried almost every day. I kept calling my parents, calling Leo, but every number turned into a dead line. I felt like trash abandoned by the world, left to fend for myself in this place where I knew no one. I almost couldn't go on living. It was his appearance that pulled me out of the mire. He told me, "Dora, you have to learn to love yourself first, only then can others love you." He stayed with me through the toughest times and taught me how to survive in this world. I held the child tightly. He is the fruit of our love. I took a deep breath. We can't start over, but I can go back with you. There are some things I have to get, they were left to me by Grandma. Grandma was the only person in the family who truly cared about me. Before she died, she left me some jewelry and a jade pendant, but my mother took them under the pretense of safekeeping. They were the only tangible proof I had of warmth from kin. Leo moved quickly. The next day someone came to the door, saying they needed to collect a child's oral mucosa sample. The person was rather rough. The child cried in discomfort. Leo stood to one side, brow furrowed, but he didn't speak up to stop it. "Are you satisfied now?" I asked him without looking up, gently soothing the child. "Wait until the results are out." His tone carried an anxiety he might not even have noticed himself. "Dora, if this child isn't yours, you'd better figure out how you're going to explain this farce to me." I lifted my head and looked at him. "What if he is mine?" Leo seemed stuck by my question. He was silent for a few seconds before replying stiffly, "Impossible." He refused to believe it, refused to consider any other possibility. He seemed convinced that as long as he could prove the child was connected to me, that would confirm my betrayal. The sample was taken away. Waiting for the results would take several days. Those days were oppressively suffocating. Leo didn't leave the little farmhouse courtyard he obviously despised. He moved into the vacant room next door, as if to keep watch over me. Sometimes he would stare, lost in thought, at my back as I hummed while holding the child. Other times he would grow unbearably irritable, smoking one cigarette after another in the yard. Once, the child cried through the night and I got up to make his formula. Stepping out of the bedroom, I saw him standing in the dim main room, his silhouette stretched long by the moonlight. "Does he often cry like this?" he suddenly asked, his voice a little hoarse. "Yes, children all do." I answered calmly, deftly warming the bottle with hot water. He was silent for a moment, then said, "For these 3 years, you've been raising him by yourself?" "No," I answered, then carried the warmed bottle back into the room and shut the door. I could feel his gaze lingering outside. The day the test results came back, Leo went to retrieve them himself. When he returned, his face was leaden, and he clutched the report tightly in his hand. He came up to me, thrust the report into my face, his voice squeezed out through his teeth. "Dora, tell me, what is going on? How can this child be yours? Whose is he?" The report plainly stated that it supported Dora as the child's biological mother. I took the report, read it carefully, then set it down on the table as if it were no more than an inconsequential piece of paper. "I told you long ago, he is my child." "Your child, what about the father? Who is that man?" He grabbed my shoulder suddenly. "Is he some thug from the village? Did he trick you?" I watched him, his emotions fraying. "He didn't trick me." I looked at him and said seriously, "We were together because we wanted to be." "Mutually willing?" Leo could not believe it. He suddenly let go of me and staggered back a step. "So for these 3 years, you stayed here and had a child with another man? Dora, do you even have a heart? We've only been apart for 3 years. Apart?" I finally couldn't help laughing. "Leo, the moment you abandoned me here and left me without a word, we were already over. You ended it with your own hands. In these 3 years, did you ever think of calling me, writing me a letter? You didn't. In your mind, I had long since become a trouble you were eager to get rid of." He was speechless, only staring at me, his chest heaving violently. "No, it's not like that," he murmured, as if trying to convince himself. "You're the one who lied, you changed, you became a stranger to me, that's why and Nina, she." It was Nina again. Hearing that name no longer stirred my heart. Leo had sat listlessly in the yard all night. The next morning he came to me damp with dew, his eyes carrying a kind of stubbornness. His voice was dry. "Dora, let's not bring up the past. Send this child away, to an orphanage with better conditions. We'll go back and get married, and pretend none of this ever happened. I almost thought I had misheard. Send him away? To an orphanage? Leo, this is my child, flesh from my body. You want me to send him to an orphanage? Then what do you want me to do? Watch you stroll past me carrying another man's child? His composure shattered again. He growled, I can't do it. Dora, you're the only one in my heart. We can start over. As long as you send him away, we can go back to how things were. Go back to how things were? Back to the time when I tiptoed to please him and placate my parents, yet could never measure up to Nina? We can't go back. I looked at him and said plainly, and I will never abandon my child. Then you can bear to abandon the years of feelings between us? He asked me, eyes red. You were the ones who abandoned me first. I answered softly, though my tone weighed 1,000-fold. He looked at me, his gaze full of pain and bewilderment, as if I were the one who had done wrong. Dora, how did you become like this? Was all he finally managed to say. I stopped being obedient, stopped centering everything around him, stopped compromising myself for their approval. Yes, I have changed. It was the solitude of those 3 years, that man's redemption, and this warm little life that brought me back to life and taught me to love myself. In the end, Leo relented. Perhaps he realized that if he didn't bring the child, I would never go with him. Or perhaps, deep down, he still nursed a faint hope that if I returned to that familiar setting, away from the place that had bewitched me, I would come to my senses and return to him. He tried to make amends in his own way. He bought many expensive baby items and clothes, filling the shabby room. I had him send them back. He watched me change diapers and feed the baby with practiced ease, his expression conflicted. He was silent for a long time, then finally said, when we go back, don't tell anyone for the time being that this child is yours. My hand froze mid-motion and I looked at him. He avoided my gaze, his voice a little stiff. Just say she was an orphan you adopted in the countryside. That way it's better for everyone, so the gossip won't hurt you. He spoke grandly, but I understood. He was afraid of losing face, afraid people would know that Leo had brought home a woman with the baggage of a child. I smiled indifferently. Whatever you want. I didn't care what they thought of me. I was going back only to retrieve what belonged to me. On the day I left, Auntie Wang next door quietly slipped me a packet of sweet potato chips she had dried herself and whispered, Dora, if you don't feel comfortable over there, come back. The people Zane arranged are always around. Zane. Hearing that name, my heart steadied for a moment. I nodded, thank you, Auntie Wang. I know. Leo watched us whisper, his brow slightly furrowed, but he didn't ask more. He would probably never understand how, over these 3 years, the people he saw as country folk had given me such warmth and support. I held the child and slid into Leo's luxury car, so out of place in this village. The engine started, and we slowly left the place where I had lived for 3 years. I left with some reluctance, but I knew, after 3 years, it was time for me to go. Some things belonged to me, and I had to take them back. Leo drove into the city. The skyscrapers outside the window were both familiar and strange. 3 years had made the city more prosperous. The car finally stopped in front of my villa. Leo stepped out first. He smoothed his suit and resumed that proud, composed bearing, as if the disheveled, broken man from the countryside had been nothing but my imagination. He looked at me holding the child, his brow tightening almost imperceptibly. Remember what I said, this child is one you adopted. I didn't answer. I got off the car cradling the child. I pushed open the heavy carved iron gate and the scene in the sitting room came into view. My parents, and Nina, were sitting on the sofa, happily drinking tea. When they saw me come in, the smiles on their faces froze instantly. My mother reacted first. She set down her teacup, hurried over, her voice thick with exaggerated delight. Dora? Is it really you? You're finally back. Her gaze dropped to the swaddled bundle in my arms. She stopped moving, her smile locked on her face. Whose child is this? Father stepped forward, his face darkening. Nina trailed behind them, her gaze sweeping over Leo and me before settling on the child in my arms. A flicker of puzzlement crossed her eyes, quickly followed by a look of concern. "Sister, you're back? This child is?" Leo took a step forward and stood between me and them, his tone calm. "Uncle, Aunt, this is an orphan Dora took in from the countryside. She pitied him and has been keeping him with her." "Adopt?" Mother's voice rose, incredulous. "Dora, are you out of your mind? You're actually adopting a child of unknown origin." Father snapped back, "Nonsense. Get that child out of here right away. Our Song family can't keep some kid with no background." Watching them act as if facing an enemy, my heart turned to ice. This is my family. 3 years gone with not a single word of concern or greeting, only accusations and disdain. I held my child tight, his existence was my only warmth. "Give me back what Grandma left me." I stated my purpose for coming plainly. My mother froze for a moment, then anger rose on her face. "You come back and all you think about is Grandma's things? After raising you all these years, we're worth less than a few pieces of dead junk." Nina gently took her mother's arm and soothed her in a soft voice, "Mom, don't be mad. Sister just came back, maybe she just misses Grandma too much." She looked at me, her eyes full of pity. "Sister, Grandma's things are all being kept safe by Mom, nothing will be missing. You settle in first, since the child has been brought back, we'll talk it over slowly. We'll find a way." She was always like that, wearing an understanding look, effortlessly pushing the relationship between me and my parents deeper into an ice pit. Leo glanced at me and said to my parents, "Uncle, Aunt, Dora just returned, let her rest first. We'll talk about the child's matter later." He seemed to be defending me, but that patronizing attitude made me sick. I was assigned the room I used to live in. The room was still tidy, but it carried a chill of emptiness, lacking any sign of life. I sat on the edge of the bed, gently patting to lull the child to sleep. From outside the door came muffled arguing, my mother and Leo. "Leo, how could you let her bring the child back? What kind of thing is this?" "Auntie, please don't worry, the child was only adopted, Dora is soft-hearted." "Soft-hearted?" "She's deliberately trying to disgrace our family. Hurry and find a way to get rid of this child." "I'll try to persuade her." Their voices faded away. I lowered my head and looked at the child's sleeping face, no ripples stirred in my heart. "Get rid of?" "They will never understand that this child is my life. My purpose in coming back was clear, retrieve Grandma's keepsake and leave. As for everything else, I don't care." Dinner was heavy with tension. At the long dining table, my parents sat at the head, Leo and I on one side, Nina on the other. The child was asleep for the moment in the room upstairs. Father ate in silence while Mother glanced at me now and then with a critical eye. Nina, from time to time, gently served her parents some food and made playful remarks to liven things up, but only emphasized how out of place I felt. "Sis, try this shrimp, it's very fresh." Nina placed a shrimp in my bowl, wearing an innocent smile. "You used to love shrimp the most, remember? When you were little you even cried over the last shrimp because you wanted it so badly." My mother frowned and glanced at me when she heard that. I looked at the shrimp in the bowl and didn't move. Shrimp aren't my favorite, Nina likes them, so there are often shrimp on the family table, and whenever I take a few more, my mother always stops me with a look. Leo glanced at me and spoke, breaking the delicate atmosphere. "Dora, eat something, you're too thin." He picked up a chopstick of greens and offered them to me. The smile on Nina's face faded a little, then rose again. Brother Leo still cares about sister so much. Speaking of it, I really miss the old days. Back then the three of us played together all the time, and brother Leo always protected sister. I even got jealous. She propped her cheek on her hand, her eyes carrying nostalgia and a hint of wistfulness. Time passes so fast, it feels like everything has changed, and yet like nothing has changed at all. Mother put down her chopsticks and sighed. "Yes. If only Dora could be as sensible as you, Nina, we wouldn't have to worry so much. She looked at me, her tone tinged with reproach. You left without a word for 3 years, and you come back with a child. Are you deliberately trying to drive your father and me crazy? They were the ones who sent me away, and now they blamed me for leaving without a word. I put down my chopsticks, lifted my head, and stared at them. I'm full. I stood up, ready to leave the dining room. Stop right there. Father finally spoke, his voice stern. Sit down. We're a family, have a proper meal together. Who do you think you're sulking for? Leo nudged my arm lightly under the table and whispered, Dora, don't make Dad angry. I looked at them, at these faces both familiar and strange. 3 years ago, it was they who had joined forces to push me away. And now, they put on the posture of victims. I have nothing to say. I turned and walked straight upstairs. Behind me came my mother's agitated voice. Look at her. What has she turned into? It's all because you spoiled her. And Nina's gentle soothing. Mom, don't be angry, sister might just be in a bad mood. I shut my bedroom door, severing myself from everything downstairs. I went to the baby's crib, he was sleeping soundly. Only by looking at him could I feel a sliver of calm. I knew taking back Grandma's things wouldn't go smoothly. But I had to get them back. They were what Grandma had left me, the only proof that I had ever been truly loved. At night the child was fussy. I walked gently around the room cradling him to soothe him. Someone tapped softly at the door. Leo was standing outside. He was in his pajamas, a trace of fatigue on his face. I heard the baby crying and came to check. His gaze fell on the child in my arms, his expression unreadable. Do you need any help? No, it's not necessary. I kept gently patting the child. He stood in the doorway, not leaving. After a moment of silence, he spoke, his voice unusually clear in the quiet night. Dora, let's talk. There's nothing for us to talk about. Just 5 minutes, he insisted. I held the child and walked to the window, turning my back to him. Speak. I know you're angry with me, he said, coming up behind me. But I haven't forgotten you these past 3 years, I just needed time to calm down. I stared out at the black night sky and felt a little ridiculous. Calm down enough to block me from every contact? Calm down enough to ignore me for 3 years? He paused. It's what your aunt and uncle think. They feel you need to cut off all contact with the outside world completely in order to clear your head. And you? Don't you have any judgment of your own? I turned to look at him. You believe whatever Nina says? She says I pushed her and you suspect me? She says I need to calm down and you just dump me out in the countryside and leave me there? A flash of embarrassment crossed Leo's face. I didn't believe her. Didn't she later clear it up? She said she slipped by herself. But even before she cleared things up, the scales in your heart had already tipped. I stated calmly. Look at the way you looked at her, you argued with me for her sake, Leo, don't deceive yourself. That's not it, he snapped back, urgent. I admit I was confused then, but the one I love is you. It's always been you. The baby seemed startled by his voice and shifted uneasily. I bent down and gently soothed the child. Love? I lifted my head and looked at him, my eyes utterly still. Your love is handing me away with your own hands when I needed you most? It's making your first reaction be to make him disappear when I came back with our child? Leo was left speechless by my question, he looked at me in pain. What am I supposed to do? Dora, tell me, what am I supposed to do? Seeing you and another man's child tears me apart. That's your problem. My voice was cold. If you can't accept it, you can leave. No one is forcing you to appear in front of me. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, hard. Dora, don't try to push me away again. Since I brought you back, I won't let go. This child, I can try to accept him, treat him as my own. We'll start over, okay? Try to accept? Treat him as his child? I looked at him and felt nothing but bitter irony. He had no idea what a child and a child's father meant to me. He would never understand, either. Some hurts, once inflicted, cannot be mended. I jerked my hand away from him. Leo, stop saying those ridiculous things. It ended between us 3 years ago. The next morning, when I came downstairs, my parents and Nina were already having breakfast. Seeing me, my mother's face still looked sour. My father said in a low voice, "Today we'll go to the hospital and give the child a full checkup. The Song family can't have any unclear lineage." I know, they still don't believe Leo's talk of adoption and want to use medical means to verify the child's origins. The baby is healthy, there's no need for tests, I refused calmly. That's not up to you. Mother put down her chopsticks. Dora, don't be willful. What if the child has some hereditary disease, or his biological parents come looking? It's just trouble. Nina chimed in a soft, coaxing voice. Sister, Mom and Dad are doing this for your good, for the family's good. Just have the checks, then everyone can rest easy. I looked at them, this whole family, always hiding behind the banner of "for your own good" while doing things that hurt me. My child, I make the decisions. I spoke with a hard, unyielding tone. Father slammed the table. You're revolting. Look at you now. No respect for your elders, stubbornly insisting on your own way. Leo came in from outside, evidently having heard the argument. He stepped beside me and said to my parents, "Uncle, Aunt, the checkup can wait. The child is still young, it wouldn't hurt to wait until they're a bit older." My mother glared at Leo. Leo, how can you be helping her make a scene? Leo patiently explained, Auntie, I'm not helping her, I just think there's no need to push her so hard. To my parents, his defense only served as further proof of my willfulness and recklessness. The breakfast ended in discord. I knew that if the child stayed with the Song family, they would only use him as a target to attack me. I had to get grandmother's belongings as soon as possible, then take the child and leave. I found my mother and went straight to asking for grandma's keepsakes. She was arranging flowers. When she heard me, she didn't even look up. What's the rush? Things aren't going to sprout legs and run off. Those were grandma's, left to me. I want them now. My voice allowed no argument. My mother finally looked up, her gaze cold. Dora, have you grown a backbone? Coming back and immediately contradicting me? You want your grandmother's things? Fine, first get that child out of here. The Song family can't afford the disgrace. A chill ran through me. Of course, they wouldn't hand them over easily. Grandma's jewelry and that jade pendant weren't priceless, but they weren't cheap either, and my mother clearly had no intention of giving them up. Grandma's things, I have to get them. I looked at my mother. That's mine. My mother snorted. Yours? In this family, what is truly yours? We raised you. Her words were a thorn, stabbing deep into my heart. Yes, in this family I had always been the extra one. Nina was their precious one. I turned and left, no longer arguing with her. If she insists on refusing outright, I'll have to find another way. I know Mother is in the habit of keeping valuables in the safe in her bedroom. The combination, I might be able to guess it. Back in the room, I watched the baby in the crib gurgling and babbling, while I plotted my next move. A head-on confrontation won't work, I'll have to outsmart her. Mother's safe code is likely my father's birthday, or perhaps Nina's. That night, I waited until the house was quiet and the lights in my parents' room had gone out, then slipped out of my room. The villa was silent. I went to my parents' bedroom door as if I knew the way by heart and gently turned the knob. The door wasn't locked. I slipped inside and, by the faint light from the window, found the safe tucked in the corner of the walk-in closet. I crouched and tried my father's birthday as the code. The password was wrong. I tried Nina's birthday next. The safe gave a faint beep and the green light came on. My heart skipped a beat, then a wave of indescribable ache washed over me. Of course, in my mother's heart, Nina was the most important. Even the safe's code was her birthday. I pushed down the feelings in my chest and gently opened the safe. Inside were some pieces of jewelry, property deeds, and a few brocade boxes. I quickly found the Zeatonwood box my grandmother had left. When I opened it, a few pieces of antique-style gold jewelry lay inside, along with that pale, lustrous jade pendant. My grandmother's voice and smile seemed as if they were still before my eyes. She took my hand and pressed the box into it. "Dora, keep this safe, this is your grandmother's dowry for you." My eyes stung, I snapped the box shut and hugged it tightly to my chest. Just as I was about to leave, the walk-in closet light suddenly came on. My mother stood in the doorway, her face ashen, her eyes coldly staring at me. With her was Nina, wearing pajamas, worry written all over her face. "Dora! How dare you steal?" My mother's voice sharpened with anger. Nina covered her mouth and gasped. "Sister! How could you do such a thing?" I looked at them. Clearly, this was a setup. Maybe Nina had long ago discovered I knew the password, maybe they had been waiting for me to walk right into their trap. "This isn't stealing, I'm taking back what belongs to me," I said calmly, holding the box. "Yours? Everything in this house is mine. I won't agree to this, you won't take a single needle." Mother strode forward and reached to snatch the box from my arms. I stepped aside. "Mom, have you forgotten what Grandma said on her deathbed? She explicitly named this to be left to me. She was confused in her old age." Mother fumed, panic and anger rising. "You ungrateful wretch, we raised you all these years. We might as well have raised a dog." Harsh words sliced into my heart like knives. Nina stepped forward and grabbed her mother. "Mom, don't be angry, be careful you don't make yourself sick." Maybe my sister was just confused for a moment. She looked at me, pain in her eyes. "Sister, hurry and give the things back to Mom, apologize to her, and we'll pretend this never happened." Watching the deep affection between them felt unbearably ironic. "I'm not giving them back." "Fine. Just fine." Mother pointed at the door. "Get out. Get out of this house. Take that mysterious bastard of yours and get out." I looked at this biological mother. I never understood why, when I'm the real daughter, they don't love me. "I will leave." I hugged the box, straightened my back, and walked past them. "But remember this, today you drove me out. From now on, I have nothing to do with the Song family." I held the child, carried a few simple belongings, and stood on the cold, late-night street. The wooden box belonging to Grandma pressed painfully against me, yet it gave me a sliver of strength. At last, I had reclaimed what was mine. And I had severed ties completely with that so-called family. There was no lingering attachment, only relief. I took out my phone and dialed a number etched into my heart. The call was answered after a single ring, and a low, familiar voice came through. "Dora?" It was Zane. Hearing his voice, the strength I had been forcing myself to maintain seemed to crack ever so slightly, the tip of my nose prickled with a faint sting. "Zane? Where are you?" He immediately heard the oddness in my voice. "I just left the Song residence, I'm at the Zhongshan Road intersection." "Stay where you are, don't move. I'll be there right away." In less than 10 minutes, a black car slid up silently and stopped in front of me. The door opened and a tall figure stepped out briskly. Moonlight traced his rugged features. Zane crossed to me in a few strides, his gaze first falling on my face to make sure I was unharmed, then shifting to the child in my arms, his expression instantly softening. He reached out, carefully took the child, his movements practiced and gentle. The child stirred in his arms and went back to sleep. "It's all right now." He looked at me, his voice low and steady, carrying a soothing power. "We're going home." Sitting in the warm car, I watched Zane's focused profile as he drove, my heart full of mixed emotions. 3 years ago, when I was first sent to that remote village, I was on the verge of collapse. All lines of contact had been cut off, I felt like an island abandoned by the world. It was Zane, like a shaft of light, who shone into my dim, despairing world. At the time he was exhausted in body and mind because of family infighting, recuperating in that tranquil village. We met beneath the old locust tree at the village entrance. I was gazing into the distance with tears in my eyes, and he handed me a clean handkerchief. Afterward he taught me how to grow vegetables, taught me self-defense moves, and kept me company through one difficult night after another. He told me, "Dora, you have to learn to love yourself first, only then can others love you. If others don't love you, all the more reason to love yourself well." He was the one who pulled me little by little out of the abyss of self-doubt and despair. We fell in love and had a child. His position was special. He was the acting head of the Chi family generation. At that time the clan's internal struggles hadn't completely settled, and he couldn't put me in danger, so he temporarily settled me and the child in the village and arranged people to protect us. He promised that when everything stabilized, he would bring us home. I chose to return with Leo only to retrieve Grandma's keepsake and finally close that chapter. I didn't expect to be driven out of the Song family so quickly. I hadn't expected Zane to arrive so quickly. It seemed he had been watching over me the whole time. The car glided smoothly into the night. Zane freed one hand and gently lay it across the back of mine, the warmth of his palm seeped through my skin. I watched the streaks of light outside blur past, the outline of the Song family villa already gone, and yet a strange lightness spread through my chest, as if a shackle I'd borne for years had finally been lifted. "Did you get Grandma's things back?" I nodded, clutching the rosewood box tighter. "They're all here." His fingertips tapped the back of my hand twice, a silent reassurance. "You did well." That night we returned to Zane's place. He had already prepared the nursery and everything else. The baby slept soundly in the new surroundings, and I lay on that unfamiliar bed, feeling my heart properly settled for the first time in 3 years. At first the Song family didn't take my leaving seriously. Mother called the next afternoon, her tone laced with the usual hauteur and impatience. "Dora, enough of this. Come back and get rid of the child, and we can pretend nothing ever happened." I calmly hung up and, on impulse, blocked the number. Leo's call came in immediately after, his voice holding a thin edge of anger. "Dora, don't be willful. Uncle and Aunt are very worried about you. Tell me where you are and I'll come get you." "No need." I looked out the window. Zane was walking in the garden holding the child, the morning sun haloed them with a soft glow. "There's nothing left for us to say." He clearly hadn't expected me to be so resolute. After a stunned pause his tone softened. "Don't speak in anger. Let's have a proper talk." I hung up again and added that number to the blacklist. The world finally felt quiet. Zane never asked many questions, he simply provided a solid support whenever I needed it. He arranged for lawyers to handle the legal matters of my grandmother's estate and hired a professional caregiver to help look after the child. He was wonderful with the baby, his genuine tenderness couldn't be faked. Even the caregiver leaned in and confided to me, "Mr. Zane holds the baby more correctly than many mothers." Life flowed on peacefully until, a week later, my phone received a message from an unknown number. It was Father. "Dora, come home, your mother has calmed down." I deleted the message and didn't reply. They probably thought I was still sulking, as I had so many times before, and would eventually give in. But they didn't understand that from the moment they chose to abandon me, the filial bond between us had been exhausted. Leo began to search for me frantically. He used his connections and even went to the countryside, but of course found nothing. Aunt Wang, following Zane's earlier instructions, merely claimed ignorance. On the 10th day after I disappeared he finally located a company registered under Zane's name. When the receptionist called, Zane was having lunch with me and the children. He leisurely wiped the corner of his mouth, looked up and asked me, "Do you want to see him?" I shook my head. He nodded, instructed his assistant, "Show him out." They said Leo waited under the company building for a full 6 hours before the security guards finally asked him to leave. Nina somehow found out where Zane lived and actually came in the rain. She hadn't brought an umbrella and stood outside the ornate iron gate soaked through, pitifully begging the guard, "I just want to see my sister, to say a few words." I stood at the second-floor window, watching her masterful performance with cold eyes. Zane had come up behind me at some point, his arm naturally looping around my waist. Want me to send her away? I was about to nod when Nina suddenly raised her voice, crying toward the villa, "Sister! I know you hate me. But Mom and Dad are getting old, they can't take this kind of turmoil. Come back, I'll go. I'll leave the Song family, okay?" Rain slid down her hair and cheeks, mingling with her tears, disheveled and pitiful, yet moving. Zane frowned slightly and dialed an internal line, his voice cold, "Show her out. Don't disturb the madam and the child." When the guard stepped forward to ask them to leave, Nina suddenly sprang up, her voice sharp, "Dora! What gives you the right to be so smug? You're nothing but an abandoned." The rest of her words cut off abruptly, probably stopped by security. But her frantic state happened to be seen full on by Leo, who had hurried over, and my parents. They were clearly there to pick Nina up, but hadn't expected to run into her at her worst. Mother still held the umbrella, frozen in place. Father's face was ashen. Leo's gaze was fixed unblinkingly on the second-floor window, meeting mine across the space between us. His eyes were full of disbelief. He saw me, and he saw Zane standing close behind me. Zane put his arm around my shoulders and led me away from the window. His voice was calm and even, "Just a clumsy clown, don't pay him any mind." What happened afterward I pieced together from business reports and the occasional remark Zane made. He purged the family with thunderous measures, seizing firm control. Once he had a footing, he began his reckoning. He started with the songs. Zane cut off the funding for several of their key projects and stole away the partnerships they had been certain to secure. The Song family's stock plummeted, and within a little over a month it was already teetering. Then came the Lee family. Zane exploited a major mistake Leo made on a joint project, mercilessly withdrawing funding and holding him accountable. The Lee clan suffered heavy losses and was left badly weakened. I wasn't particularly concerned with the ebb and flow of those business battles. All I knew was that Zane was using the most direct way a man can, to get justice for me. 2 months after I recovered my grandmother's heirloom, Zane proposed to me. There was no grand ceremony, just our garden, where he knelt on one knee, holding a ring of simple design that nevertheless glittered brilliantly. He called my childhood name, his gaze solemn and gentle. "Dora, will you give me a home?" I looked at him, then at the babbling child in my arms, and handed my hand to him. The wedding was low-key and warm, with only a handful of close friends invited. I wore a pure white wedding gown and linked arms with Zane as we walked down the petal-strewn path. The child was held by the caregiver, gurgling and giggling behind us. Not long after the wedding, the Song family and the Lee family finally couldn't hold out anymore. They sent word through various channels, asking to see me. My father's message went to my old number, and the tone was humiliatingly pleading. "Dora, it's Dad's fault. Can we meet once?" My mother even had someone pass along a message saying she was ill and really wanted to see her grandson. Leo tried a roundabout approach through business partners, sending word that he hoped to give me his blessings in person. I looked at those messages and felt nothing. Zane took my phone and deleted each of the messages, his voice flat. "They don't deserve to bother you." He shut out all disturbances for me, sheltering me beneath his wings. The Song family and the Lee family ultimately couldn't even see my face. It was said that father had waited for days under the headquarters of the Chi group, and in the end could only leave in disappointment. In late autumn, I pushed the stroller and walked through the private garden with Zane. Leaves scattered like confetti, and the child reached out to snatch the swirling ginkgo leaves, bursting into joyous laughter. Zane stopped and wrapped my shawl more snugly around us. He bent to kiss my forehead, then gently brushed the child's soft cheek. "Are you cold?" I shook my head and leaned into his warm embrace, watching the child's rosy, beaming face. In the distance the woods were ablaze with color, the sunset just right. Those years spent in exile, those unnoticed wounds, at last, under this man's protection, had blossomed. And what we lost was nothing but an unworthy past. "See, you must learn to love yourself."